The nuclear debate is still producing more heat than light. Labor didn't get any more serious over the weekend. I mean, I don't know where you go from three-eyed fish. All they're doing now is demanding costings, which the Liberals have promised, even though Labor's never provided costings for their intermittent renewables experiment. Anyway, given the late great Labor leader Bob Hawke backed nuclear energy, and Anthony Albanese seems to think it's unfair to quote him, Labor rolled out their sole living great, Paul Keating. But sadly, for a man once noted for visionary reform and economic literacy, Keating reverted to his other well-known characteristic, sharp personal abuse. Keating's statement about nuclear even had an abusive heading, labelling Peter Dutton a climate denialist and a peddler of danger, making him sound like a pantomime villain. Peter Dutton is a charlatan, said Paul Keating, an inveterate climate change denialist. Really? Dutton is the first political leader, Liberal, National, Labor or Greens, to provide a plan to get to net zero that is actually plausible under proven technology. And Keating says that's denialism. And the abusive rant continued. Dutton's policy, says Keating, is that human-induced climate change is a fraudulent concept propagated by environmentalists and left-leaning fellow travellers, a concept he believes should be deplored and opposed. Now, this typical Keating invective just doesn't make any sense, does it? I mean, Dutton has just unveiled the only feasible way to get to net zero, and Keating says he doesn't want to get there. Keating instead backs the intermittent renewable experiment, favoured by Labor, the Greens and the Teals, a model that hasn't worked anywhere else in the world and one that no other country is even silly enough to try. It's a bit sad, really, to see someone of Keating's stature shred his credibility with a shoddy partisan attack like this. But if you expected better this week from the current Prime Minister, you will have been sorely disappointed. Because strangely, for a bloke who rejects nuclear energy, he dropped a nuclear bomb this morning. It came in the form of a current state Liberal MP, former New South Wales Liberal Treasurer and Energy Minister Matt Keane. He resigned, announced his intention to resign only last week, and he's now been announced as Labor's appointment to chair the Federal Climate Change Authority.
Mr Keane understands the opportunity that the transition to clean energy represents for our nation. He understood it as a member of the New South Wales Government, and he understands it as someone who has focused his working life in recent years on making a difference, not just today, but for the generations to come.
Well, that's a very charitable assessment, isn't it? Keane is actually the deeply green renewable energy zealot who took New South Wales from secure, affordable electricity to have its highest ever energy prices and facing blackouts over summer. I mean, Keane himself has even had to warn people to conserve power.
So what we want to see is if there is an opportunity for people to reduce their energy usage, so perhaps not using the dishwasher until you go to bed, that would help.
Great memories, eh? One way to keep your power bill down is unplug everything. And now this bloke's going to advise Chris Blackout Bowen and the Prime Minister about how to keep going down this path. It's extraordinary. And true to form, Keane is already singing from the Labor, Greens and Teal hymn sheet, opposing nuclear.
In order to bring nuclear into the system, it would take far too long and would be far too expensive for New South Wales. Now, I didn't want to bankrupt the state and I didn't want to put those huge costs onto families.
But strangely, just 3 years ago, Keane was talking up the small modular reactors that Peter Dutton is now considering as part of his nuclear mix.
Right now, the prototype of that is being developed, but we're not expecting that to be commercially available until the mid-2030s. Into the future, will nuclear have a role to play? I think so, and I hope so, but right now I can't bet on technology that isn't readily available.
Look, recruiting a political chameleon and a Liberal in name only like this might strike Labor as a coup, but it actually just underscores their cynicism. The Liberal moderates have been disastrous on energy anyway. Just look at Malcolm Turnbull, who was Prime Minister, gave us the snowy 2.0 disaster, costed it $2 billion and headed for $20 billion if it ever works. And of course, as I just said, in New South Wales, Keane was so keen on renewables that he privately opposed a new gas generator for the Hunter Valley, and he reluctantly told me that he'd accept the federal government paying for this, even though we didn't really need it.
Well, we think that's a matter for the Commonwealth, and we welcome their investment of new infrastructure here in New South Wales that'll create jobs and help us with our electricity grid.
Yeah, Keane didn't think his state needed the Eraring coal-fired power station either, and now the New South Wales Labor government is paying it hundreds of millions of dollars to stay online. Keane got it wrong. New South Wales desperately needs the new gas generation and the remaining coal-fired generation because he left the state in a perilous state. Now he's going to advise Labor. Gaia, help us.
In relation to Mr Keane, I recommended to the Prime Minister and then the Cabinet his appointment because I knew he was the best for the job.
Wow, with mates like that, we're all in strife. In Parliament today, the opposition asked some reasonable questions.
Prime Minister, what is the total cost of the government's energy plan and what will the capacity investment scheme cost taxpayers?
Yeah, what does Labor's plan cost? That's a reasonable question, of course, but there was no answer, just more of that Keating-style abuse.
We do have a plan on this side of the House. It's a plan that's been legislated. And the reason why we have done that is because we know that the cheapest form of new energy is renewables. And Mr Speaker, Australia is home to some of the greatest sources of renewable energy in the world. Sunshine.
Wind,
the
leader of the Nationals, the
and the leader of the opposition's anger and negativity.
Yeah, how about that, hey? Just laughs at Dutton, but no figure for taxpayers. No reason to tell you how much the government's energy plan will cost you. I don't think that plays very well among the people who matter, and that is, of course, the voters. Here's another pointed question that gets to Labor's scare campaign about three-eyed fish.
Is it safe for Australian Defence Force personnel to be on nuclear submarines with nuclear propulsion systems?
Now, the short answer to the honourable member's question is it will be safe to serve on a nuclear-powered submarine. But whilst those opposite are trying to have some kind of culture war between nuclear and non-nuclear, at the end of the day, this is about economics, because this is economically insane what they are seeking to do.
Yeah, of course it's safe for the sailors on nuclear submarines. They're in operation all around the world, and nuclear reactors are in operation all around the world. The last nuclear accident was at Fukushima. It was caused by an earthquake and tsunami, and there was not a single death from radiation. Despite all these salient facts, what's been fascinating to watch the last few days, although entirely predictable, of course, is the way the left-leaning media has been barracking for the Albanese Labor government and its plan, taking up its attacks against the nuclear idea and never really scrutinising Labor's intermittent renewables experiment.
Charles, Peter Dutton certainly isn't holding back on this one.
Certainly not, Tom, particularly with that time frame. Having two plants up and running by 2037 is ambitious in the same way me wanting to compete in pole vault at the Brisbane Olympics is ambition. Sure, it's possible, but you wouldn't want to bet on it, and certainly not with taxpayer funds.
Yeah, but just how ambitious is it to try to power a modern economy with renewables alone? I reckon that's ambitious enough to have me winning gold in the rhythmic gymnastics. Why wouldn't Croucher and others in the press gallery ask how Labor's plan can possibly work, given it's failing already and no other country is even attempting it? And by the way, it's estimated to cost more than $1,000 billion, $1 trillion, but Labor's never asked about that either. Have a look at how taxpayer-funded TV tricked up the issue yesterday.
Am I missing something? Are we in a new twilight zone?
It's not going to happen.
If I wanted to tune into a fantasy, I'd watch Lord of the Rings.
If the Labor Party tried this from opposition, we would have been torn apart.
When will we see those costings?
Very soon, Carlos, very soon.
Days, weeks?
I think very soon.
It's the cost, stupid, and the cost of nuclear is way over the top.
Why is he doing this? You'll have to ask Mr Dutton. I didn't come up with this fantasy, he did. You'll have to ask him. All right.
Yeah, that could have been cut by ALP headquarters, couldn't it, rather than the ABC? And then they had a panel of like-minded journalists joining in on the nuclear denialism.
I think you'd have to say at the moment it probably won't work. I think it's been a pretty poor start to the debate in terms of the coalition only naming the 7 locations.
The funny thing is that not so long ago, that's what Labor was demanding to know.
They're going to have 6 large nuclear reactors spread around the country. Tell us where.
He has this so-called plan on nuclear reactors where he won't tell you where they're going to be.
But he's got to stump up with a policy, including locations.
Yeah, suddenly they got the locations don't matter anymore. But check this out.
And Peter Dutton is clearly trying to tap into the pain that people are feeling currently. And there is frustration with the renewable rollouts. There's a lack of understanding for the average person who's just looking at that bill.
Yeah, those silly old average people. That is you. Silly you for not understanding that when your power bill goes up, it's actually because Labor is installing the cheapest form of energy in the world. Really? That's the problem? Average people don't get it?
Yes, it can replace coal as a base load, but the way the energy grid has already changed is to have variable renewable in it, which is already happening at a large amount. And what we already see is the need for energy sources that can be turned on and off to adjust for that. That's why we need batteries, that's why we need pumped hydro, and we can provide what was a base load power through variable renewable if it's firmed.
It's just a Labor Greens Teals line. They're saying we've wrecked the joint already. The only way to fix it is to keep going down this path. And that's going to deliver, through renewables, a kind of baseload power? This is just nonsense. They don't even look at how it's working out now. It hasn't worked out in any other country. It's such an unattractive idea. No other country is even trying to do it. And as for horrendously costly with no costings and hugely risky, isn't that a perfect description of Labor's intermittent renewables plan? Why wouldn't journalists follow up on the costs and risks of Labor's plan? This is the critical factor missing from this debate right now. It's not a question of whether we should just embark on a bold nuclear energy strategy for the sake of it. The question is, are we in an energy cost and supply crisis? Is it pushing prices ever higher, creating trauma for families and forcing industries offshore? And if that is the case, and it most surely is, how can we find a way out of it? How can we try and keep doing the same thing? How is that a way out of this mess, to keep doing the same thing? What are our other options? And if we don't want to use coal and we don't want to use too much gas, there is only one option. It is nuclear energy, which is safe, affordable, zero emissions and proven technology. Get cracking on that, or take a punt on thousands of floating offshore wind turbines, tens of thousands of square kilometres of solar farms and so-called green hydrogen, which hasn't been commercialised anywhere yet. It's a no-brainer.